Municipal governments, by and large, run the local transit systems that people count on to get around. That makes transit a perennial election issue in many parts of the province. With us now for some advice on how to get candidates to really explain what they'll do for transit in your area, Jeff Casello, Professor of Transportation Planning and Engineering at the University of Waterloo. It's nice to see you again.
Thanks for having me, Nan.
So how important will transit and transportation be going into this municipal election?
Yeah, I think when the pandemic was in its height, I think lots of us sort of forgot about how important mobility really was in getting around. And now that we are hopefully evolving out of the pandemic, I think people are returning to getting to work, carrying out their normal days, and I think transit's incredibly important. It's the lifeblood of our cities in many ways. It gets us from point A to point B.
Well, transit is the lifeline of our cities, but it involves different levels of government. So how can municipal candidates advocate for better transit when transit is an issue that involves all three governments?
Yeah, so I think, if you're in a place like Waterloo where I am, or even in Toronto, so much of it is municipally driven. The government here and the government in mid-sized cities really have to take the lead on those kinds of things. But when you start thinking about the GTHA, then you start thinking about the integration between what's happening with the municipalities, with the provincial government, and to a lesser extent, the federal government. But it's important that all these levels of governments are working together. So, your municipal candidates have to be sort of your conduit to these higher tier governments to advocate on the things that you need to make your municipality work.
So when these politicians knock, or aspiring politicians
Yes.
knock on the door, what should voters be asking them?
Yeah, I think the most important question is, what's your vision, because I think we have to make choices about the way our cities are going to function. Are they going to be sustainable? Are they going to accommodate walking, cycling, and public transport? Because those three things are completely integrated. And if you have a candidate who's coming to your door and talking about highway expansion, I would be critical of that political candidate, because that kind of thinking in terms of our city building has certainly evolved past that point.
Because it's moving funds from transit to people who drive cars.
Exactly. In the public sector, there's only so much allocation for transportation resources. And, if you're building a $100 million freeway interchange, that's $100 million that's being allocated to a project that I think in the contemporary thinking isn't consistent with what we're trying to achieve.
And I guess if you're a car driver, then you look for a candidate that's...
Yeah, I guess that what we've seen is that our car infrastructure is pretty well established, right? For a century or so, we've been driving regularly, and on the margins now we're increasing. I came in on the 401 today, and of course we're widening all the way down the 401, and I just
so much construction.
I know, but on the margin, I'm not sure there's any real value in that. I think a decade from now, the 401 will still remain congested. So I would really argue that we need to rethink our allocations completely.
Well, let's talk about
Sure.
public transit. I want to take a look at transit ridership across the country over the last couple of years, leading up to the start of the pandemic in February 2020. National urban public transit was at more than 160 million passenger trips. By April 2020, that was a month into the pandemic, that dropped to more than 25 million. By July 2022, ridership was more than 62% of pre-pandemic passenger trips at 92 million. What kind of impact will this have on current and planned transit and infrastructure projects?
Yeah, so I think when the pandemic hit, the idea of mass transportation obviously is completely inconsistent with the pandemic, right? We don't want to be in large crowds. We don't want to be around people we don't know, those kinds of things. And so it was clear that the ridership was going to drop. But what we're seeing is this resurgence of public transit. People are beginning to realize that if we're going to have a normal lifestyle, we have to be able to move with low impact and with high convenience and so on. And that's what public transit does. And so I would expect a decade from now, absent any other kind of global pandemics that we're not aware of, I would think that I'm sure that transit is going to be an incredibly important part of moving people in cities of all sizes, in Toronto and Ottawa and Waterloo and in Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie. So, I think for sure that transit is going to be an important part of how we move around.
In response to the lower ridership, some places have actually increased fares for transit. And because of the financial pressures that were placed on like the TTC,
Sure.
wherever you are in the world, in Ontario. But what can we be asking our municipal candidates when it does come to affordability?
Yeah, so this is a really important question. And so, we price public transit because we want to recover some part of the operating cost of the system, right? And that value will range from 70% or 80% in a place like Toronto to 30 or 40% where I am. And I think a municipal politician, the kind of question you could ask is, sort of what's your tolerance for supporting public transit? Because there are some places in the world that have fabulous public transit that only recovers about 15%. Portland, Oregon has a really low recovery, but they do that purposefully. And the government just is committed to supporting public transit at a rate that's going to make it effective and convenient for its residents. And that's a really good question to ask your politicians. How comfortable are you with allocating property tax funds or other kinds of funds to supporting public transit?
So you're saying the political will has to be there?
Has to be there.
In Ottawa, a recent poll asked voter concerns, and overall, the LRT and public transit were top of the list.
Yeah.
And if you're ever on Twitter when the LRT
I know.
doesn't work, there's a lot of frustration because people need to get to where they're going. Can you tell us what's happening there?
Yeah, so that rollout was exceptionally bumpy. I mean, let's be honest, it's not what the public expected. When you make a major investment like that in a system, and in some ways, Ottawa is a victim of its own success. They had such a great busway system. It was so widely used. It was so much concentration of the bus activity that the downtown became impassable. So they invested in LRT, trying to upgrade the system, the quality of the system for all of its residents. And the rollout has been not very good. And so, you can understand that the public is frustrated like that. And so I think the questions you ask now is, as you're looking forward, how do we ensure that this doesn't happen again? There's not too much, there's some benefit in looking back, but looking forward, how do we make sure that the testing is in place, that the system design and implementation is ready for ridership and ready for activity? I think that's where that system fell down.
Well, let's talk about Central Ontario. Another link that connects communities is the rail. It's not within municipal jurisdiction, but can municipalities get involved with this?
Yeah, so our rail system in Ontario and in Canada is, candidly, it's abysmal. I mean,
I kind of side there.
Yeah. It's, I'm going to Europe next month, and I will land in Frankfurt. I will take the high-speed rail to Karlsruhe, where I'll be, and then the entire continent is available to me by high-speed rail. And if I wanted to go to Montreal today, it wouldn't be competitive by rail. And this is an oversight in North America, but I think it's a huge problem in Canada where we have this natural corridor to go from Quebec City to Montreal to Ottawa to Toronto and then perhaps to Windsor or Niagara with a rail system that would become competitive. I mean, we talked about always construction on the 401, we talked about congestion on the 401, and that's because we haven't invested at all in rail and in intercity rail. So if your municipal government, your would-be politician comes to your door, really ask what their position is on connectivity between your city and the rest of the province. I did a study a while ago that said that something like 90 flights leave Pearson Airport every day going less than 500 kilometers. So from an environmental perspective, that's a disaster. And if we could replace that with rail, it would be a huge opportunity for the economy, for our environment, and for our society. So ask your politicians where they stand and how they're advocating with provincial and federal government on intercity rail.
I don't know if you've ever taken the Greyhound.
Yeah.
I used to rely on the Greyhound, and when we talk about cities not being connected, that's something a lot of people in the north use to get around the province, to go into the States. What kinds of questions, and the Greyhound is not available anymore,
Right.
What kinds of questions should we be asking candidates about intercity travel?
Yeah, so if you are in the north or if you are not in the GTHA and you want to move about the province, the question is, how can you do that reliably and how can you do that at a level of cost that is affordable for you? And if car remains the only option, that's going to exclude a whole lot of the population, those who don't drive, those for whom driving is problematic.
Or expensive.
Or expensive, yeah. People don't drive because of cost reasons or because of physical wellness reasons. But really, as a province, we have to think about what the connectivity is between our cities. If someone needs a medical procedure that's not available in the north and needs to come to Hamilton or Toronto, how do we make sure that they can do that in a way that is affordable, convenient, I don't expect chauffeur service, but something reasonable that will allow people to get to the places that they need to be for quality of life enhancing activities, education, wellness, those kinds of things.
What about west and south of where we are? There's an increasing population: London, Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, Windsor.
Yeah.
What should they be asking?
Yeah, I was listening as you were talking about housing, and I think that what's happened is there's so much immigration in the province, and Toronto has become so expensive that what's happened is now people are moving to the west and to the east. So you'll see that. And in Waterloo, we see people are coming. When you see in London also the same thing, that we have population growth there. And so this this is the quarter in which growth is taking place in Ontario, the southwestern Ontario quarter, and so the connectivity there is becoming even more important.
There's a model used in Innisfil, Ontario with Uber, where essentially Uber is used to fill in the gaps where there is a lack of public transit. Is that something people should be asking from their candidates in areas where buses might not work?
Yeah, so in very small cities, buses play a role where they are intended to really be mobility for those who are, who struggle with their own mobility. In low density areas, the car is so convenient that the transit often doesn't play a really big role. So in Innisfil, they said it costs a lot to provide bus service that very few people are using. So maybe we should subsidize rideshare as a way to give people mobility. I think the Innisfil experiment has been mixed in its results.
In what ways?
Yeah, so what's happened is there's not a lot of local drivers in Innisfil, so lots of the drivers who are actually providing those trips in Innisfil are coming from the GTA, so you've got cars deadheading, driving empty up to Innisfil to help support that mobility and then driving back to the GTA at the end of the day, which isn't great from an environmental perspective. I think it's cost a little bit more than what Innisfil expected it to cost, and so have to be careful. I mean, I'm certainly open to new and creative ideas to solve the mobility problem. I'm not sure that that's one that's a model that works in a lot of places.
Depending on where you are in the province, there's been many delays in transit projects. Yeah. Is there anything that can be done on the municipal level to get transit off the ground?
Yeah, so I think the government has allowed us to expedite the environmental assessment process, right? So from the conception to when the shovels go in the ground, that tends to be much quicker now than it was 5 or 8 years ago. And so that's a real improvement that's made. But anytime you start digging up the ground, there's going to be delays. And I think we can do more, we call it due diligence beforehand, sort of do some exploration. When they built the Waterloo LRT, they found a corduroy road, so an old wooden structure that would have been the original roadway surface on King Street. And of course, that puts a hold on everything. There's archaeological activities that take place. So these delays, some of them are just unavoidable, to be perfectly candid, and some of them can be avoided. So whatever you can do before the project starts to ensure that you are in a place where you know what the expected timelines are, that's the right outcome.
Even speaking about delays, just very close to here on Eglinton, the delays have impacted businesses.
Absolutely.
And if you live in Hamilton, it's like, stop playing with our emotions
Yeah,
here. Are we getting it? Are we
know.
not getting the LRT? For people in the GTHA, what can we be asking our candidates?
Yeah, so there can be financial incentives that are built into these kinds of construction contracts that will say, we put the time and the disruption ahead of the cost a little bit, within reason. So if a contractor finishes early, there can be economic incentives for that. If a contractor's delayed, there should be some pretty strong economic disincentives for that. So as you're starting to think about these transit projects, ask your politicians about how those contracts are being structured and what's their thought process on ensuring timeliness over, what's the balance between timeliness and cost, because I think that's an important issue for people to think about. I'm
just thinking of Eglinton, another year for this to happen.
Right.
And, I don't know if this election will impact that. But what would you say is the key thing we should be thinking about when it comes to transit and transportation when municipal candidates come knocking on our doors?
Yeah, I think it's back to the first answer that I gave you. I think that transportation remains the lifeblood of our cities. And I think you really have to ask your political candidates, where do they stand? Like, what's the vision for the city and for the municipality in which you live? Because if the vision is, I'll tell you what the contemporary thinking as professionals in this space is, that we're thinking about compact cities. We're thinking about livable cities, so things built at a human scale where people can walk and cycle and use public transit. We're talking about low environmental impact. We're talking about diversities of businesses and jobs in our urban cores. And that's true, of cities of all size. You don't have to be Toronto or Waterloo to have that. Even our very small and mid-sized cities. Stratford, look at how successful their economics are. Their downtown remains really vibrant. It's a terrific place to walk and cycle. And so that's what I think you should be asking. What's the vision for our municipality a decade or 2 decades from now?
We've got about 30 seconds, but it seems like transit and housing are kind of connected. You have people who don't want more housing in their neighborhoods, even though it's closer to transit, they might not use transit. So how do you, the people that don't rely on public transit, how do you convince them that they actually benefit from it?
Yeah, so what we see is when you build a transit line, the property values along that transit line go up because the accessibility that you have now, you can be anywhere in the community just by public transport. And so there becomes really desirable to live there. And that means that what tends to happen is higher income, people move in around those spaces because the properties go up in value. And that can be a negative force in terms of trying to introduce moderately priced housing or increase the density of housing around those quarters. But if we're going to invest in the public transit and we're going to make this node where you have access to the entire city, and then we have to make housing available in those areas, and not just high-income, single-family, detached housing. There has to be different levels of housing access in the station areas. It's part and parcel of investing in public transport.
So a win-win for everybody. Thank you so much, Jeff. Really appreciate your time for helping us understand this. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.